New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. We are at episode 501, and today very pleased to have Bill Bennett back in the seat in the studio. Welcome along, Bill.
Hi, Paul.
Great to have you here.
Yeah, love it.
Now, episode 501. Today we are going to talk a bit about gadgets. There's some tech industry and sort of sector news as well. There's some delving into some New Zealand topics in the field of education, also updates from the Telecommunications Forum. We've had all sorts of gadgets flying around the place, including the brand new Samsung Note 20 Ultra. So I've been having a bit of a play around with that one. We've both had some time with Microsoft's newest, what would you call it, mini Windows tablet, the Surface Go.
Yeah, well, I did a review of that, and I said it's not really a tablet. It's really an ultra portable, or even a two-in-one, more than a tablet. But
so we'll delve into that one, and I want to talk a little bit about some of Jabra's gear, and Jabra have been reasonably well known for a lot of their Bluetooth headsets, but they've also got a really interesting conferencing camera that I've spent some time looking at, and then a new device from Huawei that just arrived as well. So lots to delve into. But first up, a huge thank you to all our show partners who make the show possible. And they do it in a really nice way, because our partnership arrangement means that they don't actually get any control over our editorial, and if they need to be held to account, then we do. But they're awesome companies, and they do a huge amount for the tech sector in New Zealand. So first up, want to thank them: Sumo Logic, Vodafone New Zealand, Spark New Zealand, Vocus, HP, Samsung, Gorilla Technology, and a headline partner, Umbrella Connect. So, huge thank you to all of those firms for the support that they give to technology and innovation here in New Zealand, and especially for their great support of the show and their willingness to sort of operate in that arm's length manner, which is incredibly generous. So let's delve in, Bill. Huawei. This is really interesting. Reading that they're saying that they're running out of processors to make their smartphones. So, first of all, they had the challenge that basically they were, banned from including, the Google Play services, Google Play Store. They're just able to access the open source elements of Android. And now they're saying, well, actually, we're no longer going to be able to get chips, even their own chips, because their chips, to a most degree, aren't actually made in China. They can probably still make some small quantities, but it could largely put an end to their phone business,
and perhaps all their device business. Yeah, in some ways, what's happening with Huawei, it resembles what's happened in the past with countries like North Korea and Iraq, where they just shut off from US technology because the chips, they're not made in the US. The chips that they're using in their phones are actually made in Taiwan by, is it TSMC? Yeah. And but the thing is they're made with US intellectual property in them. So and that's what's not allowed to be transferred. And that's how it resembles the past bans on countries like Iraq and North Korea, where you're just not allowed any of their IP.
The timing's very interesting, isn't it? That you've got this, incredibly, I guess it's a sort of an incredible moment for Huawei, where by some metrics, they're now the number one smartphone maker in the world.
Oh, they're definitely number one. They were definitely number one in the last quarter, yes.
Yeah, when you look at those numbers, probably quite heavily driven, definitely heavily driven in China, because that's their main their main market. And in China, they don't have the issues that they've had in the rest of the world because people don't use Google Play services in China. So they've been able to continue to, dominate and do well in that market. And we were chatting before we started, and you mentioned that during that period, this last quarter, I mean, China was largely out of the lockdown that other countries have been in. Yeah, their economy's not necessarily in the perfect shape, but it's been enough for smartphone sales there to be in a reasonable state.
Well, that's right. I mean, I forget the exact numbers, but smartphone sales dropped hugely during that quarter, year on year, and pretty much what didn't drop was Huawei sales in China, and that's because the shops are open again and people are going out and buying stuff again in China, where the rest of the world was largely in lockdown and people don't buy phones. And the other thing is you don't buy phones when you're locked in the house. You might buy a new laptop or a PC or whatever, but the phones are about mobility, and mobility is something that just wasn't happening in that quarter for most of the world, but in China, of course, it was, and so sales just sailed on. So that's largely what happened there. But going back to the ban, what we're really seeing is a tightening of the screws by the US on Huawei. And the store is saying that they're going to run out of chips by September. Well, unfortunately for Huawei, the US election, where things may change, isn't until November. I don't think the actual regime changes in the US until January anyway. And it's not going to be the first thing on the agenda of a new president, if there's a new president, to do that. So they're, really it's like the sands of time are running out for their device business, and it's going to be hard to get back to it afterwards. Even if the the tap's turned on again, it's going to be something of a uphill mission to get back into the game. But I don't think I think Huawei will find a workaround for dealing with China. They'll be able to source chips in from China and so on. The other thing is that if the Americans are going to play hardball in this kind of way, then it's quite possible that, because China's always had a different relationship with the world of IP and intellectual property than the rest of the world. So China's attitude could be, well, okay, guys, you won't play ball, we won't do it nicely. Well, in that case, then we won't play nicely with the IP game. And that's a possibility that could come from this. But the other thing it does is it ties... One thing that Huawei's been very keen to make clear to the world up until now is how they're not closely tied to the Chinese government. But their future could be more closely tied to the Chinese government. And they've been pushed in that position, ironically, by the US government. So it could be something of an own goal. Because, if the Chinese factories start making stuff using American IP but not paying for it, well, what's going to happen there? So it could be an own goal.
Yes, well, I think we have uncertain and unusual times ahead in so many different areas. I was reading today about a billionaire media mogul in Hong Kong who's been locked up for espousing views in Hong Kong that lean much more in the direction of democracy than what the Chinese government hoped for. So, I mean, it is very, very unusual times in so many regards.
Well, the other thing we fall into the trap of thinking is that China is like solid and homogenous behind its current strategy. And that may not be the case. I mean, we don't really know because it's not a democracy and people don't speak out. But there have been rumblings that high levels within the Communist Party and even generals and so on are not happy with the way things are progressing there. So it could be that it's going to change. But whatever happens, the timescale for change is not going to suit Huawei. It's going to be a problem for Huawei in the phone business. And I would suggest that there'll be a lot fewer Huawei phones sold outside of China in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to be the case. Now, on these geopolitical issues, where we're also hearing that Trump's going a bit broader in terms of we knew that he was targeting TikTok and was threatening to close it down just in the last couple of weeks. Now we know, of course, Microsoft came onto the scene. Bill Gates has since, and we were talking, potentially a $50 billion acquisition there. Bill Gates has come out and sort of, poo-pooed it and said TikTok would be a poison chalice. Now Trump is saying that TikTok and WeChat will both be banned in the US in the second half of September. So, yeah, in a pretty short space of time, if the situation hasn't changed in terms of acquisitions and so on. So things are really stirring up on that front. And
how are they going to police that? I mean, will people be able to use a VPN to use those services?
Well, I imagine there'll be blocking WeChat and TikTok from app stores, which is starting to sound a little bit like what happens in China, right?
It does.
You don't have all these apps in the app store, and you have this great firewall of China. So, is Trump suggesting there's going to be a firewall blocking access to those things? That seems unlikely. But
so go and invest in a VPN.
Yeah, but certainly, in terms of will people install TikTok? I would think it's reasonably unlikely you would need a VPN. On an Android device, you can, of course, sideload apps, pretty easily. So if those were banned, you can imagine there'll be a lot of people that would sideload them. When you get involved in sideloading apps, your chance of actually getting a dodgy version of that app, increases dramatically. You get it from the wrong source, and people might be worried now around sort of security implications, but doing it that way just increases the risk.
And here's the other thing: is that we tend to talk to an audience of people who are largely able to deal with those things. The truth is that 90% of people in the world aren't going to be able to safely sideload apps, and aren't going to be able to navigate a non-standard app store. So the potential for chaos there is huge, and they're the people that are going to be the problem, not the people listening to us.
I wouldn't be surprised if we would see some sort of web variant of those. But I don't know how simple that would be with WeChat, which I'm sure that's it's probably not too hard. And of course, web apps are far more capable today than what they used to be.
Well, I was going to say the other thing about banning TikTok is clearly Mr. Trump doesn't expect to win the vote of anyone under the age of 30 then.
Well, there was already the huge rally that he held, which didn't end up being so huge because a bunch of people on TikTok had all registered as though they were going to be there, registered for seats, and of course weren't turning up. So
you see, in the normal run of things, I would say there's no link between those two things, but we're talking about a president where there could be a link between those two things.
Possibly so. Now, on the US front, we've got Intel, the world's biggest chip maker for forever. It's felt like that anyway. They are now in a position where Nvidia are poised to actually be a more valuable player, which is fascinating.
Well,
Still, AMD are a long way behind other ones, but Nvidia, in terms of just driven by sales of smartphone chips especially.
And we already mentioned the Taiwanese, and I think the Taiwanese are now manufacture more chips than Intel, but they don't have the intellectual property in the chips. So I think the Taiwanese are now bigger. Their business is bigger than Intel's, and that's a lot of that's to do with the ARM chips as well, the ARM processors. Well, the thing is that Intel basically did what Microsoft didn't, and that is that when pretty much, I mean, it goes back longer than this, but pretty much when Apple introduced the iPhone, it changed everything about the tech sector. And Microsoft, in effect, they pivoted, to use the current term, they pivoted to become a cloud company. And really what you see with Windows and Office and so on is now secondary to the cloud business inside Microsoft. That might not be what they say, but if you look at the numbers, that's what's going on. Intel didn't have an option to become a cloud business in the same way. They did, in the sense that they built chips to power cloud servers,
sure,
the Xeon chips and so on, which use that. But of course, the big cloud server farms are actually making their own chips, because it's easier for the likes of Amazon to go out and build their own chip foundries for their purposes. So Intel's just missed out on the changeover, and Intel really lost the game with smartphones. They really didn't make it into that game at all, and that's really where they lost the plot, because phones I think they outsell the likes of PCs and tablets by something like 5 to 1, I think it is. Whatever it is, the numbers are massively more, and so what that means is the people that are making the chips for those things are getting the economies of scale and everything, which was historically Intel's big thing, is they had the economy of scale. They no longer have that. So
they also lost their way on the innovation front.
Yes,
and so they've ended up sort of a reasonable way back from their competitors. Their shrinking of chips, which they used to do on a
still
regular
haven't got
basis.
7 nanometers working.
They're way behind. We're seeing other chip makers sort of going to, I think, certainly there's a lot of 7 nanometer stuff in production. Intel's are mostly still on 14 nanometer.
I think Intel's a year away from 7.
Some 10, and they've just announced that they may actually start outsourcing the manufacturing
to the Taiwanese
of their chips. And I mean, Intel was always, they were the leader at designing the chips and manufacturing the chips every step of the way. Intel was the leader, and even AMD, who make their competing processors for PCs and laptops, are now in a very, very strong position with very competitive processors. And we've seen, really, it's just been the last couple of years, but we've seen AMD start coming back. Microsoft are making Surfaces with an AMD chip, HP, Lenovo, etc. Everybody is incorporating those options. Now, the price differences, maybe aren't enough, and it's there's
the AMD kit's a lot better than it was
momentum to sort of build up. But I can imagine we could be in a position in 5 years or 10 years where an Intel PC is something of a novelty, because it's not the norm. I mean, that may well not be the case, because they are such a large and a trusted brand. But look, if AMD manages to get a few further steps forward, and Intel get stuck where they are now, then it could be a huge change.
I think that's right. I think what happens is that with these large, seemingly invulnerable tech companies, there's quite often a tipping point, and that just happens. That passes, and at the time doesn't really register that it was a tipping point, but it is. And I think that happened with Intel. I was thinking, though, when you were speaking, that I can't remember how many years ago it was, but Andy Grove's book was it about paranoia? Wasn't it Survival of the Paranoia?
I can't remember that.
It was something about you have to be paranoid. Only the paranoid survives. What's that effect?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And I was thinking, perhaps Intel just stopped being paranoid.
Or maybe they were too paranoid. They were looking at everyone else rather than getting on and getting the job done.
Yeah.
Certainly, they've made so many announcements they failed to deliver on. It certainly feels like it.
But there was definitely a moment probably about 12 years ago now, when the iPhone came along, and I know that Intel doubled down on the PC at that point. And that looks to be such a smart move at the time, and it wasn't, so.
Yeah. Now, looking a little bit closer to home at New Zealand. There was the report came out last week from the Telecommunications Forum, or the TCF, and they how often do they put out their big reports? Something like every 3 years, don't they?
Yeah. And it was a gathering of the clans. I mean, there was a Zoom broadcast with all the CEOs of the big telcos.
Yeah, one or two who were busy and weren't able to attend, but they were all represented by somebody else if they weren't able to be there. So it was great. Jolie Hodson from Spark, Jason Paris from Vodafone, JB from Chorus, Mark Callender from Vocus, Steve Fuller from Enable, Matt Bolland representing 2 Degrees, and Peter Calderwood for Trustpower.
Yeah.
I remember dealing with it, Trustpower, when I was doing work setting up their first PC Windows network, probably over 25 years ago now. Peter Calderwood's been around for a long time there, but it was fascinating actually just to hear these different voices and their different perspectives, and they're all certainly fiercely competitive with each other, but the Telecommunications Forum brings all those players together.
Yeah, and they've got things in common, common issues. What I thought watching it, there were 3 themes that shone through from that hour-long. Was it a presentation? What would you call it? Whatever it was, the broadcast.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was led by Jeff Thorne, who's been on the podcast, I think it was earlier on this year. And, of course, he's speaking on behalf of the Telecommunications Forum. So the view he's presenting is one that is very much from, from the telecommunications industry perspective, shall we say.
Yeah, there were 3 themes that came through, right? The first was, and I think this is fair enough, it was a bit of a slap on the back for how well the companies coped with the pandemic and how everything was in place, everything worked, there was cooperation where there needed to be cooperation and competition where there needed to be competition, yada, yada. We've talked about that before on the podcast, and I think that was just brilliant. That was just great. That was the first theme. The second theme was, and I'm going to put it in my words, not their words, is that we're not paying enough for telecommunications. And that's fair enough, because the return you get on investing in a telecommunications carrier in New Zealand is not high. It's in the low single digits, and partly because that's partly because of the good thing, and the good thing is the way the industry was set up with the separate levels, the separate layer for the fibre network, and retailers sit on top of that, and the wholesalers can't sell to end users and so on. And the problem is that the problem that created is that it's very low barrier to entry rather in the market, and relatively small telcos can set up a full suite of services pretty much, and it doesn't cost them a huge amount. But
they might not make much though.
No, they don't necessarily make much, but they don't need to, because if you're say a dozen people and you're servicing so many a few thousand customers, that's quite a bit. But you don't have the big building in Victoria Street which Spark has to pay for, and the TV campaigns, and the big infrastructure, and that which was it's not my third point. It's the second part of the second point, is that telecommunications doesn't actually scale that well. So the bigger companies don't necessarily, they don't make better margins, shall we say, than the smaller ones necessarily. It just doesn't scale well. So you add 20% more customers and you get 20% more revenue, but you don't necessarily get a much higher profit from
you have to have more people in your call center and all
exactly.
those other things.
So it doesn't necessarily scale very well, and those are issues. And the other thing is that it's probably the only service that we've known about in our lifetimes where you get more and more and more, but it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper while it's happening. Now, that kind of did happen with Moore's law and processor power.
Yeah, we have an expectation, I think, of that around technology. We get more for a smaller spend, although that's been quite variable over the years. But if you take inflation into view anyway, we've done pretty well on the general technology front.
Yeah, well, Jason Paris did something interesting in that presentation, which has been quoted a lot in the media, which is basically people go into a Vodafone store, they buy a $2,000 iPhone, and they complain about $20 to connect to the network, which is fair enough. But and it's a very good point, because people don't value the connections. But when I was thinking about this, I like to chew big things like this over before I commit to print. And one of the things that occurred to me was, it's not at the $20 end, because you can get a $16 account with Skinny or 2 Degree. You can get those low end prices. That's not where the real changes happen. What's really happened is that if I think back, say 10 years, if you wanted an all bells and whistles mobile account with the maximum amount of data and yada yada yada, it's going to cost you $120 a month. That kind of 120, 150 a month. Nowadays, you can get all-you-can-eat mobile plans for, $60, $70 a month, which is a lot less, but a lot less in price, but a lot more. You get a lot more phone, you get a lot more service for that. So that's where I think the real price problem has happened, is at the high end. And something that Jason said to me a couple of years ago when I was interviewing for a different story, he said the problem with telecommunications in New Zealand is all the profit is competed away. And that's absolutely true, because the structure of our market means that there are, when the market was restructured probably about 12 years ago now, the idea was that carriers would be able to compete on levels of service, on quality of service. There might be a business class service for a certain sector of the market, whatever. But what they ended up all doing is they just competed on price. And so the price quickly descended to the lowest common denominator. And I was talking with some execs from another carrier just recently, and they were saying that, really, you and I might be paying your service provider $80 to $100 a month for a gigabit line or whatever. They probably make in the region of $6, $7, $8 on that at the when it's all washed up, which isn't too bad. But when I say make $6, $7, $8, I don't mean that's their profit. I mean that's what they have to pay their wages and their rent and everything out of. So the actual the actual margins they're making are in the low single digits, and the threat is that the investors may not be happy pouring money into building next generation mobile networks if they're going to make low single digit margins.
Well, I'll play the devil's advocate a little bit here, Bill.
I'm not, but this is it's not my argument. This is their argument.
No, but just. So we do have that good competition, and one of the things that they called out is that New Zealand has the fourth highest level of telecom investment in the OECD on a sort of per capita. So right now, certainly the investment's going in, and yes, some of that has been driven from the government level in terms of the government's obviously supporting getting fibre and ultra fast broadband out there. There's the rural broadband initiative as well. So there's that side going on. But I mean, I haven't seen the signs that say that any of our telcos are really sort of stepping back. They all seem to be, pushing forward. Yeah. I mean, with COVID, yes, I think that we've certainly seen some signs of caution there around probably the pace of 5G and so on. It's probably not going to move at quite the same level as it could have done, and there's a fair bit of unknown. And it was highlighted on that call that they have this sort of coming challenge as the economy potentially breaks down a little bit more as wage subsidies and so on disappear. They're trying to get their head around how, what do they do? Do they do they disconnect families who
we'll come to that one in a moment,
and so on?
We'll come to that one in a moment, because the thing is you're right, okay, but the thing that we're not seeing in this debate is that at a time when I think the bank rate in New Zealand, the official bank rate, is 0.25%. Getting a 3 or 4% margin return on your investment is actually not that bad, right? It's bad by historic standards, and it's bad by what we've come to expect from the tech world. So they're quite right, but part of their problem, I think, is, and it could have been Jason who said this, but one of the people said that there's an expectation in the market about pricing and quality of service and so on. And that, people are basically expecting a bit too much and not expecting to pay for it. Well, it's not just the consumers that are expecting a bit much. This is a world where, we're living in times where there's not much growth going on anyway, and so on. And really, I think, that the telco sector has probably got to that point a little bit earlier than the rest of the economy. Which is where we're going to, which is we're not going to see the same levels of growth that we've seen in the past anyway. So I think there's
well, we went from nobody having mobiles into New Zealand, where it's what the number of average SIM cards per capita is
there's something like 1.4 or something.
Well above one, isn't it? And so but you can't expect those numbers on traditional types of connections. Yes, when we look at Internet of Things and so on, there are going to be more connections, but much lower cost connections and so on. So,
but that's the supermarket model. If you go into a flash boutique with a designer's name on the door, right, the margins on things in that boutique are like 60-70%. You go into Pack and Save, and the margins on things are 2%, 2 or 3%. So it's that they're in the supermarket game. They're not in the the high end fashion part of the market. But there's another part to that, which is where I think you were going, which is the third theme that came out of that report, was the digital divide, and people that are wrong side of the digital divide at the moment, and by extension, that people who may become on the wrong side of that digital divide once they lost their jobs and so on, and they've got less money. And there's a tsunami of debt that's going to arrive at the telcos when people stop paying. Well, should they cut people off? That's got to be a commercial decision. But I thought that, and again, it was Jason who said this right at the end of the session, the online session, was that if people can't afford, because there's a lot of talk about that there should people that having internet access should be a right and it should be free.
It should be a human right.
Yeah, it should be a human right. Yeah. Okay, and I'm not going to debate that one way or another, because I think that's a political debate. That's not a technology debate. That's something that for our voters decide as a society if we want to go down that route.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have, but we certainly haven't got time for it today, because we've got a few other things to delve into, and those sort of discussions are, I think it is important that we do look at it, and what sort of challenges does it create if we've got a segment of the population that don't have access to the internet and information. Definitely it's certainly not a directly a technology decision, but I think it is an aspect that we will need to delve into at some stage.
Yeah, but it's a much broader thing than technology companies making money or whatever. It's how we want to run our society.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. The other point that stood out was just how world class our internet connectivity is, and I think they said we're ranked number 3 in terms of mobile connectivity in New Zealand. We heard that figure around 4th in terms of investment in telecommunications, and we rank very highly on our fixed access because of fibre, which the uptake has just grown and grown. Which is awesome.
Which actually reminds me. You actually just reminded me of the other point I wanted to make in all of that, and that is that we're still, even though the main part of the first phase of UFB has been finished, we're still in a build-out stage.
That's right.
The rural connectivity group is still building rural towers. There's still, rural stuff to go in terms of fibre and so on. And so we're at a point of almost peak industry investment, or we actually probably past the peak, but we're still at a point where there's a lot of investment going. But once that fibre network is finished, and once that RCG network is finished, the capital expenditure should drop. I mean, there's still the whole thing about building the 5G network, and you can end up building a tower in every corner because it's high volumes and so on. There's still that, but that's a strictly commercial decision for the mobile carriers. But as an industry in general, we're still in the build-out phase. And it's true, right, that the mobile carriers are never not in a build-out phase, really. I mean, it just sort of cycles through like a...
And even our fixed internet usage, keeps going up at a pretty strong clip, 40 to 50%, usage growth.
But it tends to be an incremental investment on there, because basically it's just about putting better responders each end of the bit of fibre than... So,
but it doesn't mean that there won't be any investment. So there will still be some.
But the thing that's often lost, right, is that the civil engineering part of the job is the expensive part, and the civil engineering part of the job, apart from building more 5G towers, the civil engineering part of the job is largely done.
And that's the beauty of having put fibre in the ground rather than fresh copper and other things that other regions might have done. All right, well, we've got to move along because we wanted to just a quick mention in terms of local news was Network for Learning, which is the government entity, are offering schools free health checks as we start heading into exam season, which I thought was good to see them looking for how they can help schools. Now, I don't know all of the ins and outs of how they do that, and I hope that the schools don't necessarily get overconfident. But it was interesting reading those things, because just because you've had a health check or some education doesn't mean that you're going to be completely safe and secure. And we heard. I think it was last year around one of the schools that got hit with a cybersecurity incident. So no one's immune, but if there's something here that they're making available to schools, then I hope there'll be a good uptake and schools take advantage.
Well, the thing about Network for Learning, right, is that if you think of the telecommunications network, which we just talked about, as being the hardware, things like Network for Learning are the apps sitting on that hardware, and it's in effect an application of the fibre network which has been built. And what Network for Learning has been doing, and it's done a fabulously good job of making sure that schools get a certain level of technology, and in the last year or so they started a project they were upgrading all the school Wi-Fi incrementally around the country. I think it's a 4-year project, but we're going to have the first schools in the world to have Wi-Fi 6, for example, in every classroom. And the Network for Learning's remit used to stop at the point where fibre entered the building, but now they're moving into networking the school, and they're starting to provide services like monitoring for security and so on. And there's a couple of other projects that's going on. And what you're seeing really is that sort of service application layer of our telecommunications network, and Network for Learning is a very active part of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a good benefit of that approach, because there's a level of efficiency that they can bring by looking across all of the schools in the nation, and as long as they stay reasonably fast and agile, that's going to suit the large majority of schools. Now there'll be other edge cases where schools don't necessarily want to use everything that they've got on offer, But the more they do that, the more efficient that's going.
Well, it's basically like schools computer networking as a service thing, and there's actually a control room in the Network for Learning offices where they can see the status of, they can check. There's a list of all the schools around the country, and this school is currently offline, and yada yada yada. It's just like a checking thing. It's really quite impressive, and part of how I see their role at Network for Learning is that teachers are not technologists, and so they, just as a company these days wants to outsource its responsibility for its technology to technology providers and resellers and partners and so on. Schools, a teacher really wants to be teaching. They don't really want to be stuffing around trying to get a modem to work or fixing the Wi-Fi or whatever. So they professionalized it and outsourced it, and it's like in effect a service.
It's great. Now, we promised for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the latest and greatest new technologies coming through. The Samsung Galaxy Note 20 and the Note 20 Ultra are the new kids on the block, shall we say. They're not quite available for public. They're available for pre-order online. I had a look last week ahead of their public announcement and a little bit of time, and we've got the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra here. Now, there's a degree, Bill, to which with these new releases that seem to come around so fast that there's a bit of fatigue because it's been going on now for so many years. But also, I don't think that the interest in new technology is disappearing at all. There is probably a longer period that people are tending to keep their devices, and part of that I think is probably driven by the higher price points now for the top end devices. Looking at the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, if you get that, the 4G variant is $2,100, $2,300 for the 5G variant. So they're actually giving you a couple of options there. The base Note 20 now $1,700 or $1,699. So these aren't low cost devices. So I can understand why people will want to get a reasonable sort of lifespan out of this equipment. And we look at businesses today who in a lot of cases will be rolling over their main technology, laptops and PCs about every 3 years. There was a time there where a lot of people were replacing their smartphone every year. I think that's dropped off a bit with these higher price points. But I think each time we're seeing nice improvements that are brought to the table.
They are nice, but there's not been anything sort of wow factory lately, has there? I mean, the last thing I thought was really wow was the foldables. And that's kind of wow, but it's also kind of, is it going to last?
Yeah, well, and something that I saw a bit of news about over the last couple of days was an e-ink sort of foldable e-ink type booklet, as it were, that it folds up like a little book. The screen's protected because it's closed. It's not as fragile as a smartphone screen anyway. Little stylus and so on. That was very much a sort of a tech demo rather than a product. But there are still, completely or mostly new, gadgets and things coming through. But it tends to be if a new product hits at the time where you're ready to replace it, or some of its features sort of fall in that, in that sweet spot. And I look at the Samsung releases when they come out. They've interestingly done very well with their cameras over the last few years, and I think that's probably one of the standout things with their Note is that it's right up there on the camera front, as is the the S20, and but the big unique thing about the Note has always been the stylus.
The stylus, yeah.
But they seem to be taking this approach this year that the Note is a device for sort of two audiences. One for those, wanting a business, a productivity device, and then they've got this sort of other aspect, which is gaming. So I find that sort of fascinating.
I find it fascinating. I also think I'm going to stick my neck out here and say it's wrong. Right, you can't have a device which is a business device and a gaming device, right? I mean, you can have.
I think you can, because these days there's so much crossover, right? I mean, especially something that sits in your pocket, you're going to use it, during the day to do your work on.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you're a gamer, then you might use it at night. Now, I don't know how big that particular audience is.
Yeah.
But from a device manufacturer perspective, they want to win as many customers.
And I
as
agree.
They can.
I mean, I don't actually know. I could be completely wrong, but my gut feeling is that when it comes to phones, the gaming, there's a lot of people that will spend $2,000 on a business phone to do work and be productive with. I don't think there's so many people that are going to spend $2,000 on a gaming phone. I think if you're going to spend some money on gaming device, you'll go and spend it on something like an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever.
Well, they're gearing up with this to be able to do the game streaming from Microsoft, which of course we just heard in the last few days.
I think there are better devices gaming devices for handheld gaming than this. I just don't.
I guess. Well, we'll certainly see how that pans out. But we've just heard how Apple have basically closed the door to cloud-based game streaming on iOS, unless it's something that they provide,
through their game store,
which is very interesting. And they're basically saying it's because, look, we've got our app store. That's where all the apps come through. If you provide a streaming platform, then we don't get to check all of the games, and we're starting to see a rift opening up there between Apple and Microsoft and others who are not so pleased with Apple's approach.
About 18 months ago, I was at Mobile World Congress, and one of the key applications being touted for 5G mobile was gaming, right? And I could be wrong here, but I don't think in the last 18 months 5G mobile gaming has set the world alight. And was it that they were too early? I don't think so. I think sometimes because you can do something with technology doesn't mean you should. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the best approach.
It's true.
And I think if you want to hit the gaming market, this is purely my opinion, and I'm not in the phone business. I don't sell phones. I think you want a $600 device or a $500 device. You don't want a $2,000 device, because you don't want to be sitting on the bus with this thing, doing all that sort of wacky gaming stuff, and you drop $2,000 worth of kit, and you don't eat again for another year or whatever. You know what I mean?
It's pretty interesting what I see in terms of the devices that people use. I mean, these top end devices aren't, they're not just for chief executives and so on, right?
No,
they're very broadly.
Oh no, I used top end phones because I work with
right?
them.
So we'll see how it plays out. It is interesting to to see. But Samsung is certainly keeping going on this sort of two product announcements, big product announcements on phones each year.
They did 5 announcements at once the other day with that.
Yep. So they were showing off the Note 20, their new Galaxy Buds Live, the beans as they look like and get referred to, which they look pretty cool.
They're easier to swallow than AirPods.
Well, I haven't tried that, Bill, but that'd be interesting if you wanted to hear a bit of extra sound coming from your insides.
Yeah, but, I bet you someone will.
They had their new Watch 3, which I see they're moving in, and I don't know whether this is the case in New Zealand, but certainly some markets they've got the ECG, electrocardiogram capability that we've seen from other vendors, Withings, which I'm wearing today, have got that, and Apple, of course. So, things are getting competitive, and they showed off new tablet as well. So, they're certainly not sitting still.
No, and here's the thing about Samsung, right? Samsung need to keep a steady flow of new products, a busy pipeline of products coming, in a way that Apple doesn't necessarily need because Apple makes money from selling the hardware, but it also makes, once you're into the Apple ecosystem, you're into iCloud, you're into gaming store, you're into the App Store. And so once Apple's got your $2,000 for your initial phone, they're going to collect another X dollars a month from you for other things. Samsung haven't been able to do that in any meaningful way yet. So Samsung needs to keep the pipeline full of exciting new things coming. And all credit to them, they do a great job. And I completely understand why this would be this is the top brand in New Zealand when it comes to phones.
Dual SIM, I believe, locally. I haven't actually double checked how that works, because we're obviously starting to see it often be an eSIM rather than be physical for the second SIM. So I can't recall what the situation is on that front. So that's the latest from Samsung. Yeah, they've got their higher refresh rate for gaming, and all the other bits and pieces in terms of big battery and whatnot. They seem to be cozying up to Microsoft a little bit more. So there's a bunch of announcements there on their software, their integration with Windows, being able to take your phone and We've had this capability where you could basically mirror your screen, into your Windows screen, as well as turn your whole monitor into a desktop, extended off the smartphone with DeX. But now, and I haven't tried this yet, but I was reading how you'll basically be able to take any of the apps that are running on the Note 20 and basically put them on your screen in their own windows and so on, as their Android apps are effectively running on your smartphone but displaying on your screen.
Yeah, I've seen that. I was going to say that the other thing, there's an interesting dynamic in the market, because we've already talked a bit about Huawei running into all kinds of problems, but with Huawei out the picture, Samsung in New Zealand, it's basically Samsung and Apple. It's been Samsung and Apple really, with Huawei coming up for years now. But now with Huawei out the picture, it's Samsung, Apple, and the also-rans.
Yeah, I mean, Oppo seem to be growing their market share. I mean, certainly the market shares of the other
people wake up and realise that that's another Chinese brand.
are smaller, and the Nokia product, I think has actually improved. They were sort of you call them a new brand. I mean, they were an old brand sort of refreshed, but they came in. Their first phones, over time, we found they weren't necessarily as well built as you might expect from Nokia. They seem to be getting better. There's certainly a premium you pay for their devices, but they're getting the software updates. Certainly in a commercial sense. I
was going to say that I like the Nokia software a lot. So I feel Nokia. I mean, Samsung has its charms, and one of the charms is the fact that you can, in effect, you can use this thing as a PC. But one of the things I like about Nokia is that it actually feels like Android ought to be. I don't know.
I mean, it's a very clean Android, isn't it? There's virtually no, modification to it, and that's got a little bit easier over the years, and the extra sort of software layers have become less obtrusive, I guess it's fair to say. Now, we've got a couple of other things that we wanted to quickly touch on. Microsoft Surface Go 2, you and I both sort of spent a little bit of time looking at it. one of the things, I mean, this is just an oddity, and maybe Microsoft were trying to prove a point, but it seemed like both you and I got the one with what's called the Pentium Gold processor, which is effectively the Intel Atom processor, which is a pretty slow. A pretty slow chip. They also do an Intel i3, which is the lowest end of the chips that we see in laptops and PCs today, and a reasonably low end mobile variant of it. But what they send out for review wasn't even the i3. I don't know any other vendors that do that wouldn't give you the sort of the fastest variant, but there's of course a price difference between the two. What was your experience? Because I think probably the sort of level of power that I tend to draw on, I'll take as much as I can. I can get, but you're often sort of doing word processing and you're writing.
I am. I mean, I pretty much wrote the same thing, but from the opposite perspective. So I wrote that it's a great machine if you've got minimal needs. If you just need a laptop, and technically it's a tablet, but really no one buys a Surface without buying the keyboard. So it's a laptop. And if it's quite expensive for a laptop of that class in terms of its power, but it's a beautiful little product for if you just need a decent quality laptop to type and do things on the go. And I always think with these things that the real test is the tray table test. If you can, if you're flying to Dunedin and you've got to write a story, can you do it on a tray table? Well, you can't with the laptop you've got in front of you there, it's too big for that. But the Go is ideal for that. So for the sort of work that I do, it's brilliant. But I mentioned in my review that if you want power, don't buy this. But if you're a writer or whatever, I mean, I don't know what point it's not powerful enough. But I would imagine if you're like manipulating a big spreadsheet with say 3,000 cells or something, it would start to top out at about that point.
Well, I think it's that often it's the sort of multitasking, flicking from one thing to another. There are times when you soon run your head into a limitation or for me, I mean, there's just a whole variety of things, whether it's a Photoshop, audio editing, video editing, and you wouldn't fix programs,
Photoshop,
right? Those things can all run on it. Yeah. But you're going to be sitting there. Yeah. Getting a little bit bored. I mean, it is very much for the more basic tasks. But I do like that. These things all now have a USB-C port, so you can actually dock them to a nice, huge docking monitor. I've got the, HP's 43.5, inch ultra wide screen, and I was able to tap into that. It charged the Surface Go 2. It all worked very nicely in those regards. The camera stood out. Their 1080p camera, that was probably one of the highlights for me.
For Zoom.
Is with all the video calling, conferencing and different things, a lot of laptops have still been on these lower quality cameras, 720p.
If you're lucky.
And so having 1080p both front and rear, I thought was was really good. So
and it's in the right place.
It's certainly not a rubbishy piece of hardware by any stretch of the imagination. Specs wise, yes, this is a smaller device. There's not as much power as the higher end Surfaces, but you've got this is about 500 grams and 10.5 inch display.
Almost put it in a pocket.
It's a very, very nice piece of kit, but you just don't want to have too high expectations of it, because its overall performance is going to be probably less than half of a typical laptop that you'd be buying today.
Well, I was going to say that it's an ideal device if it's not your only device. If you've got a desktop at home or a desktop in the office and you just need something for occasional work.
Yep, or take to meetings, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
the one where you scribble your notes
Yep.
on. You want to use the stylus, then
Yep,
then
that's
it's
brilliant.
great. Yep. Yeah. So, good to see that here in the market. Took a little while for me to get it, have a look and try it out. The other things I've been looking at, there's a new laptop from Huawei, which they are allowed to still make, Intel processor, Windows, the MateBook 13. I've only just started looking at that, but it feels really robust for a small 13-inch laptop. It certainly looks and feels quite MacBook like, except a Windows device, touch screen, a fingerprint reader that it looks different to the Apple, but effectively you've got a fingerprint reader for authentication. It's got the model that they sent across, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 SSD. I'm not sure on the exact pricing in the New Zealand market. I haven't seen those details confirmed yet, but it looks, in terms of just the initial hands-on with it, like for its sort of size and profile, quite a powerful machine. Now, I'm not sure who the target will be for that in New Zealand, because corporates are generally looking for machines with a 3-year on-site warranty and professional aspects to them that that limits them to a small number of brands that provide that. Although corporates go and buy Apple gear and you can't get on-site warranties for Apple in New Zealand, so I'm sure there will be a place for it, but there's certainly a bit of unknown around will Huawei be able to keep making these things for an extended period of time, or will they get hit there as well?
Well, we could talk a bit more about the device itself, and it is a nice device. I've got one at home too at the moment to look at, and like you, I've only just opened the box. Really, I haven't really got it going, but I think what we have to think when we're talking about a product from Huawei like this is, it's as much about making a statement about where Huawei wants to be and its positioning and so on as it is about the product. And some 5 years ago now, I was talking to a senior exec from Huawei at one of those big telecommunications events overseas, and he was saying, we want to be Apple. We want to be Apple. We want to have laptops. We want to have desktops. We want to have tablets. We want to have phones. We want to be in that space. And it's
other consumer electronics as well that sort of fall outside.
He said we want to be a Chinese Apple. And I mean, that's, never mind the fact that all their big money comes from telecommunications network hardware. I think what they were doing is they were parlaying that business into being an Asian Chinese Apple version of Apple. And I think that's really what it is. It's a statement of intent as much a product in the market. And
yeah, you might have hit something there, Bill, because one thing I noticed, even visiting the Huawei campus, was that, and even visiting Huawei, in New Zealand, I haven't seen that all their staff are using Huawei devices.
No, well, it's not their culture to make them, though.
Always caused me to scratch my head. If your company makes these devices, why isn't everybody using them? But with people using HP and basically whatever brand, I guess
it's a cultural thing though, because I can remember not so many years ago when you'd go for a meeting with Huawei people and they weren't even using Huawei phones. Right, it was, and it's just not in the nature of Huawei culture to impose that on people.
Right.
And I don't think people felt that. Maybe the company culture is changing now. Maybe now it is expected, but it would be, you'd be hard pressed. I mean, can you imagine turning up at the Apple campus with an HP laptop? Right. It just wouldn't. It's not that there's a rule that it can't happen. It just wouldn't happen. And it would be like that for most Western companies, but I don't think Huawei was in that place. Maybe they will be, but really, I think it's far more about positioning. And I'm reminded of, it wasn't so many years ago when Samsung used to make laptops. You don't see them anymore, right?
Well,
But-
I thought they were coming back with laptops.
Oh,
I saw something on the laptop front,
Paul,
or am I
what?
thinking a tablet with a
there's
keyboard
a
on
tablet. But Samsung have been in and out of that for ages. I don't think Samsung have ever stopped selling PCs in Korea.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
and I think they've been in and out of Western markets, probably 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's not so much. I mean, they're not there. I mean, they'll sell you one, and they want to make money from these things. But it's really about saying, look, we're this company, and we can do all these things. And when you buy in one of our phones or one of our network switches or whatever, you're buying into this whole world of wonderful technology that we can produce. It's a positioning thing.
Yeah. All right. And then the other products that I've been having a look at are Jabra. And so I've been testing out one of their Bluetooth headsets, and this one is interesting. It's the Evolve2 65, and Jabra are very much targeting the corporate. So this one, Bill, you might see there's a little button on the side there. It's got the Microsoft Teams logo on it. So you can get a Teams variant now of just about every, every audio conferencing, video conferencing type, speaker, microphone type kit. So they've got their portable speakers and they've got these headsets. And if you've got their software installed, you can actually tap that button and it'll take you in to, if you've got a meeting, that'll just take you into your current meeting. It's got another feature which I hadn't realised, and I'm told that this is actually a reasonably common feature. Is the microphone that sort of arm that comes down. If you slide that up, that mutes the mic, and you slide it down, that turns the mic on. Now, again, it's not a new feature, but I didn't even know that existed. But I was jostling with it, and the Evolve2 65 has a lot of voice prompts, so it'll tell you what the battery level is at. It'll tell you that you're connected, and it alerted me that said, raise that up and basically push the mic arm out of the way. And this is a stereo headset with the the little mic boom on it, and it mutes it and slide it back down again and it turns it on. Pretty slick. The main issue I had was I tried to use it directly with my laptop over Bluetooth without plugging in their Bluetooth dongle. And I talked to their support, and they said, actually, we don't really test that. That's not part of what we do. We supply it with a dongle that just auto pairs, it works. Yeah. You plug that in and it's just connected. And so they test that in order to get it to work flawlessly. And so, just word to the wise, if you're expecting to get Bluetooth to work.
Might be a non-standard Bluetooth. It could be something else. Well, you can use it without, but then some of their premium features sort of, drop out. So you just have to be aware that there will be some difference. And of course you can pair it to multiple devices, to your smartphone and your laptop and so on over Bluetooth. But using it with their own Bluetooth dongle, that's when you get the best sort of support. And the other thing is, with all of the Jabra devices I'm finding, firmware update before you do anything, because there seem to be bug fixes and improvements, and they might not work perfectly at first, but they're going to work at their best with the latest firmware update. Now, I found that especially with that one. The other product that I tried is Jabra have got this new camera out called Panacast. Now, this is a company that they actually bought that make this camera for video conferencing, and it's designed for sort of smaller, they call them huddle rooms, where you've got a few people maybe huddled around a camera and a little audio conferencing unit. And it's designed to be able to do, it can do a 4K resolution in terms of width, but what it does is it has 3 cameras, and it overlays the video from these 3 cameras. So you get a very wide image. And it will auto adjust accordingly. So it'll crop it down if there's, say, just one person. And it seemed like a really, really nice concept because the way that it brings it together gives you the viewer at the other end a much
a much better image when it works. But what I found was sometimes, maybe it was to do with my glasses, I don't know what it was, but something in terms of its facial recognition, and it would end up cropping the image, like halfway through my head. So because it uses software to do that, you have to install their software layer, make sure you got the firmware updates and so on. And look, some of the time it would work absolutely flawlessly, but other times I would get partly chopped. But if it was working flawlessly, absolutely brilliant, great concept. Reasonably pricey. I think it's about $1,600 sort of retail for the unit. But when there are a bunch of Logitech and others who do their conference cams and so on, and this is quite a unique offering in the market, reminiscent of the product which Polycom ended up picking up, now called Poly. Their product that they picked up from Microsoft, which was the full 360 degree conference room camera. You'd put it in the middle. And I'm not quite sure what happened to that. Didn't really get the pickup, but I mean, this is I guess it's half of that product. It's got 3 cameras in it. They could create a variation. Maybe once their software is perfect, we will see a new variation. So we'll just have to see how that plays out anyway.
Well, video camera is definitely a thing to have at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Not working from home though so much now for a lot, although it does seem to be that the average amount of time that people are spending working from home post lockdown is a lot more than what it was before lockdown.
But even if you're not working from home, even if you're working in Auckland, you're not going to be flying anywhere other than, well, you might fly to Christchurch or Wellington, but you're not going to be flying anywhere for some time yet. And I understand people, even with internal flights, some companies are not doing that. They're doing teleconferencing rather than, the internal flights. And I heard one company which only allows people to drive between cities, which is,
it's interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Roll on the autonomous vehicles. More software updates from Tesla. Yeah. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you, Bill. It's been great to catch up again. It's nice to be well out of lockdown here. I hope that continues. And great to have lots of new technologies starting to flow through, and there seems to be a lot of activity in the local market. So I'm upbeat on where things will head next. Although I'm still keen to see some movement on the government front from a strategic perspective, as far as taking advantage of this window of time where we're in a reasonably unique place as a country, and that we're COVID free outside of the borders, and there's some opportunities that we should be looking at.
Well, if you're going to be stuck anywhere, this is a damn good place to be stuck as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. All right, thanks, Bill. Now, where do people find out online what you've been up to? You've been posting a fair bit on your blog, reviews and articles.
Yeah, billbennett.co.nz is my site, and I've been doing more lately. Towards the end of the lockdown, I thought, well, I could spend some more time playing games on my computer. I could actually do some work, and so I did. And the thing is that I find that once you get into the flow of that, it becomes easier to keep the flow going. And I'm on Twitter as Bill Bennett NZ, and that's about it. I tend not to use the other social networks. In fact, I don't think I've got an account on any of them anymore.
I tried to tag you on LinkedIn, Bill. Couldn't find you.
No, I've gone. I left about 5 years ago, and I wonder if it might be time to go back. But that's another story entirely.
All right. Well, yeah, we're hoping you'll be back. All right. Well, thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone for listening in. Always fantastic having you here, and the show only keeps going because of our awesome listeners and our audience. And feel free to pass back any feedback through our social media channels across LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And you're welcome to track me down and email me via my website at paulspain.com. All right, thanks everyone. See ya.
New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community, proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.